So it's my pleasure to welcome Anna Zielinska. Anna did her PhD in philosophy between Cracovie and Grenoble, right? And she is now an associate professor at the University of Nancy. And she is a more legal and political philosopher at the University of Lorraine and at Sciences Po Paris. And she is the head of the Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Unit of the Faculty of Humanities of University of Lorraine. And she's going to talk about the quest of truth and requirement for diversity. So please welcome Anna.
So much. So yes, that works wonderful. Yes, so I thank you for the invitation. Really intimidated to be here because unlike all of you, I don't do studies. So I will do something very different with not a huge number of quotations, let's say, because this is how we work in philosophy. Concerning the last presentation, I was really struck by this. Step back in the media and in the movies, but it is also quite visible in the current war situation. I think that we are all struck by the fact that we have no other people than men who are leading today's wars. So this is very striking, and I think that something should be done not only on our level but somewhere else. Yes. So, but this is unfortunately not the scope of our. The situation in which we are right now is really tricky, also from the point of view of the studies, and I think that it again goes back to what we have just seen. Studies of what kids from 17 to 23, 24 think about gender roles. You have all seen, I don't have these slides here, but it doesn't matter, you have all seen these results. The gender bias in the perception of the world between the conservative men and liberal women is getting bigger and bigger. So we are in the very new situation, I think, from this point of view. Not necessarily very optimistic, but let's try to figure out what has happened during the last century, I would say, from the point of view of what we were trying to do in philosophy of science. So indeed, I'm just going to say in one or two phrases the whole story, and then I'm going to give you some details of this story. So as you know, this science and philosophy were quite monogender. I was so happy this morning to hear so many decent people questioning the gender binary. So I do struggle myself to develop to use the notion of men and women, etc. Because I do think it's a bit problematic. So anyway, so the history of philosophy was made by mostly men, and a few women who were behind this history have been forgotten. Now we are trying to do something with this. But I don't think, of course, as probably you share this thought, that this is due to, discrimination, properly speaking. It doesn't mean much to discriminate at that level. I think that there is something deeper in the story, some deeper fantasies that have been mentioned actually in the first talk. So I think that our quest for the purity coming from Plato is something that is both completely mistaken but also completely understandable. There is something spontaneous in our mind to look for elegance of the explanation, or the unity of the explanation, the generality of the explanation. So this is why we struggle with individuals. This is why we want to have the types to understand the world. And for some historical reasons, completely some random circumstantial reasons, indeed, masculinity has been associated to to this elegance, and femininity has been associated to something like chaos or lack of explanation. If you want to try to figure out how did this happen, I'm not going to talk about it, it's not the topic, but I really advise you to read something about the beginning of Christianity, about the church fathers, the patristic literature coming from the very beginning of Christianity, the first, second, third century, explain very elegantly, or not explain, but shows very elegantly how many schemas were born and are now being repeated in the society, but also in our own brains. But yes, so this Platonic elegance led to the idea according to which indeed we thought that scientists, in order to be, a scientist is a man. Yeah? This is something that was, of course, criticized in the 20th century very much. From this criticism, coming from thinkers, who I'm going to quote only once, and that is, thinkers from the French tradition, like Michel Foucault, for example. From this criticism, we have learned that since science is not as elegant as it was supposed to be, science is not, Foucault says, at the end of the day, aiming at truth. It is aiming only at exerting power. So this was the doxa of the first criticism of a kind of dominant conception of science. This led to a crisis in the public perception of science. So my aim as a philosopher, it's not only my aim, several people are doing the same, and I'm going to tell you their story. I'm trying to say that no, we can include diversity in science and still preserve the quest for truth. But we have to get rid of this elegance-driven Platonic conception of what the truth is and what the scientific inquiry is. So this is the aim of this presentation. Okay, so this is how we have seen the thinker, the scientist, philosopher for ages, right? This is this romantic figure against the world, solitary, male, of course, very probably white, also as you see here, German. Also, the picture is German. Okay, and then I'm going to quote you my favorite philosopher of science, Ludwig Fleck. He was a medical doctor in Lviv, Ukraine today. At that time, it was, between countries. Anyway, it doesn't matter really. Ludwig Fleck was working in the book that you see here in many languages on syphilis. He was trying to understand how this disease emerged, how did it become important, how it evolved, the public perception of it, etc., etc. So from this, he concluded that, that science is not dealing with some very straightforward and very transparent objects, that the object of a scientific inquiry is being constructed. As you see, genesis and development of a scientific fact. Scientific fact is not a given, but something that is being developed. But again, for him, unlike for any other, for many other thinkers that come after him, like Thomas Kuhn, for example, and Michel Foucault. For Michel Foucault and Thomas Kuhn, the consequence of this would be, well, then there is no truth. And Fleck says, yeah, of course there is truth. Of course. Why would we be doing even, what we are doing, namely science? So Fleck, indeed, had this idea according to which the Cartesian isolated thinker should be forgotten as a leading figure in the philosophy of science, in science, because the science is being constructed within a society. There are social factors that contribute to the way we cognize the reality. Well, I know that you know all those things, but I was just, I do insist on the fact that there was someone who was really the first person who wrote it at some point in history. It was in 1929 in the paper On the Crisis of Reality. Ludwig Fleck invented the notion of Denk collective, the collective of thoughts. At no time do we resemble a blank page, nor are we in a state of a tabula rasa as is the screen before a film is projected on it. Cognition has no discernible beginning, certainly not at the moment of birth or even in the womb, because the capacities for feeling and feeling as such originate in a parallel and synchronous way through interaction. Right, so this is something that we, in a way, know, but even philosophers today are somehow unaware of the fact that we can keep those two ideas at the same time in our consciousness, namely the idea that the scientific thinking is somehow social, but at the same it really aims at truth. What does it mean? What truth means. I'm going to be Aristotelian here. I hope that you don't mind. Truth means just a description of a phrase, a proposition that is true is the proposition that describes the facts as they are. There is no substantial, we don't need any substantial definition of truth. It's just the relationship between the phrase and the reality. So Ludwig Fleck says in the book that I just quoted at the beginning, the views outlined here should not be construed as skepticism. We are certainly capable of knowing a great deal. If we cannot know everything, according to the traditional position, it is simply because we cannot do much with the term everything. For every new finding raises at least one new problem, namely the investigation of what has just been found. The number of problems to be solved thus becomes infinite, and the term everything is meaningless, right? So an ultimate set of fundamental first principles from which such findings could be logically constructed is just as non-existent as this everything. Knowledge, after all, does not repose upon some substratum. Only through continual movement and interaction can that drive be maintained with which yields ideas and truths, right? On what ought the absolute reality to be, on what ought the absolute reality to be independent, because there is this requirement that absolute reality and the science that goes with it should be independent of to be independent tout court, but of what it should be independent. Well, if one wished it to be independent of men, one ought to consider that in this event, it would also be of no use to man. So the fact that science is dependent of the subject that exercises it is not a failure. It's one of the features, right? And this is why we need a collective that creates a space to confront different standpoints in as equal manner as possible. So one should construct knowledge and science democratically, taking into account that it would then become much less dependent on time because the collective develops much more slowly, but also more consistently. This is... Okay, so this is the way of the natural sciences. Okay, so this was for this was Ludwig Fleck. I'm not going to introduce you to this woman. If you don't know Shayla Jazanov, you all know Shayla Jazanov. She's the best of us. So she was doing exactly the same things as Fleck, but in her reality and from the perspective of, from international perspective. I don't always follow her conclusions, but what she brought to the discussion is essential, because she precisely did develop the idea of put forward by Fleck, namely that the idea that there is an important relationship between science and democracy. We should be able to spell it out. For Jazanov, there is some loss for the truth. Fleck is absolutely into the idea of keeping the solidity of the inquirer as aiming, the scientific inquirer as aiming the truth. So, Shaila Jazanov is one of the mothers of the movement that is called STS, that you know, of course, Science and Technology Studies. Science and Technology Studies, unlike classical political theory, refuses to take either epistemic or political legitimacy as given by nature or fixed in principle. Instead, recognizing that scientific and technological practices matter in the making of democracy and vice versa, STS scholars attend to the ways legitimacy comes into being in scientific thought, in technological choices, and in political action. And again, here we have to understand what is the power that is being exerted, but without reducing the scientific enterprise to the exercise of power. There are some worries, but I'm not going to talk about it a lot, but there were some worries expressed about how the science is being developed in the 60s, in the 70s, and even in the 50s of the 20th century, where many scientists did work for military industry, decided not in virtue of democratic considerations, but rather in virtue of military interest or corporate interest of all kinds. So one of the reasons why science is not being trusted today in certain communities, it seems, is due to this temporary monopoly of science by these enterprises. So worries about technocracy originally revolved around the premise that experts, technocrats, might seize the reins of power without respect for public preferences. It means also that in order for science to be trusted, it has to be democratic. It has to refuse consistently to be to serve, let's say, the technocratic powers. The expertise and technocracy should be opposed and not put together, I think. So there are, of course, the well-known criticisms coming from the Global South, where indeed science did serve to inflict violence, very simply, and to inflict injustice. And these are the ideas that have to be taken into account all the time when we are thinking about the international development of epistemic justice. I'm going to go to that to develop this issue in a few moments. So scholars looked upon science and technology as modes of governance with powerful yet hidden normative presumptions. Again, one of the reasons of distrust towards science, and one of the reasons to make science democratic and to give various voices, to make various voices hear within science. Gendering also infiltrates the politics of technology. Innovation, even in domestic technologies, may reinforce rather than cure gender inequality. The representation and treatment of women's bodies by male-dominated hierarchy in the life sciences and technology was one of these elements. And feminist writing reclaimed a territory in which women's perspective had long been underrepresented. So, in the area of human reproduction provided a very interesting and rich site for critique of these biased scientific practices. Among recent publications on this topic, there is this very nice book. It's a popular book. It's not a this book resumes somehow, summarizes the debates that are taking place in this area. Superior, the return of the race science from 2019, and here we have this idea which is obvious, but it deserves to be stated. A number of Enlightenment thinkers, including influential German philosophers, Kant, Hegel, defined humanity without really having much of an idea how most humanity lived or what it looked like. A universal understanding of human origins was actually created at the time by white men in Europe who only had indirect access to information about other people in the world through the lens of colonialism. And in universalizing humanity by seeing themselves as the paradigm, they had laid the foundations for dividing humanity, instead of making of the universalization something that the universalization itself has promised, namely the unity or something shared, right? So a few words now from properly feminist literary epistemology that I think did provide some very important and essential inputs. The first author I would like to quote is Alison Jagger, who was trying to say something interesting about the cognitive power of emotions. And she did it in 1989. And she did it not as an empirical statement, but she was doing her attempt to give to emotions some cognitive capacities. Was based on the analysis, let's say, of what philosophy was doing till now. Interestingly, 6 years later, Antonio Damasio published his Descartes' Error and confirmed empirically what she was trying to say on herself. By the way, Aristotle did already have this thought that emotions are cognitively potent. So what she was trying to say, moreover, next to this idea that emotions have the cognitive capacities, she was trying to put forward the idea according to which some people, in particular oppressed people, have a kind of epistemological privilege. Insofar, so they know better, very simply. To have an epistemological privilege is to know better. Insofar, they have an easier access to the standpoint of someone being oppressed, and therefore a better chance of ascertaining the possible beginnings of a society in which all could thrive. I would claim, she says, that the emotional responses of oppressed people in general, and often of women in particular, are more likely to be appropriate than the emotional responses of the dominant class. That is, they are more likely to incorporate reliable appraisals of situations. Right? So this is one of the first voices of this kind. These voices, because now there are many of them, became really mainstream with this book that is now 15 years old or something like this, by Miranda Fricker, about the epistemic injustice. So epistemic injustice is the situation in which, indeed, you are made, you feel at the end of the day that what you know about the world, that your knowledge and perception of the world is of lesser value than the perception of the world of people who are in the situation of epistemic superiority or legitimacy. So since this book, and she provides some data and some conceptual analysis that is extremely useful to understand how this distinctively epistemic genus of injustice made impossible to include all the possible, all the present voices in the arena of either social sciences, but also in natural sciences. But this is a kind of political philosophy, moral philosophy book that is essential, but this is not the book I would like to finish with. I think that the authors we should all have in mind, and I'm sorry if these are the authors you have always been reading and I'm just repeating things that you already know, but I have the impression that these are not necessarily people you all have in mind. So people I'd like you to read, if you have some time, are Sandra Harding and in particular Helen Longino. So Helen Longino, she is she updated the proposals made by Ludwig Fleck. So she updated with some contemporary data, with the observation of what happened in the 20th century. She just updated what Fleck said, and she said, well, if we are not making a collective that includes people of color, a collective that includes people of all variety of gender, if we are not doing this, our science is going to be poor. Because those people know more things than, people who do not have this diversity. I still have 5 minutes, right? It was 20 minutes. Okay, so I'm not going to read all those things. I'm just going to show you this idea that the objectivity from Longino, objectivity of individuals consists in their participation in the collective give and take critical discussion, and not in some special relation that they may bear to their observation. Objectivity is dependent upon the depth and scope of the transformative interrogation that occurs in any given scientific community, right? I'm not going to read all that, but it's not a matter of either or, but of degree. The greater diversity and openness of a community and the stronger its protocols for supporting free and open debate, the greater the degree of objectivity it may be able to achieve as individual biases and background assumptions are outed by the community. Right? So her position is called contextual empiricism, and as I said, she is defending the possibility of objectivity by inclusion. Okay, so I'm not going to get into that anymore. I'm just finishing with this slide saying that, of course, science seen like this is fragile, but everything that is nice that we have is fragile. So this is the quote from Cornelius Castoriadis, this French-Greek writer from the 20th century, where he said, okay, democracy is just the best thing that ever happened to us. But there is nothing that protects democracy from disappearing. And there is nothing, per se, in the essence of the world that protects us from suicide, right, or madness. Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you.